Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So interesting turn of events today. I was backing out of the driveway and noticed a slight squeak coming from the rear wheel on the Ridgeline. So today we're going to investigate, but typically what that means is that we have some sort of a caliper pad issue going on. On this truck in particular, it's basically my winter vehicle, and so those who are familiar with vehicle use in the Rust Belt area will be familiar with the significant deterioration of calipers, rotors, and slide pins on calipers. So it's no surprise. Part of my typical annual maintenance on vehicles that I drive in the winter months has been to lube slide pins and to make sure that pads move freely. But as you can imagine, that over time your efforts just evolve into a need for replacement of parts, and that's where I'm kind of curious if this is where we're going to end up after we investigate on this truck. At this time, the Ridgeline has about 42,000 miles on it. It is a 2017 model year vehicle. It spent first year in Indianapolis, and then as that individual who owned it, the original owner, moved to North Carolina, they sold the truck to a BMW dealership, which is where I acquired the vehicle. The story there is that while we were on vacation visiting some friends in North Carolina, I had the opportunity to view this vehicle, and it was such a great deal at the time that I couldn't pass it up. The vehicle had been on the lot for some time because, as you can imagine, it was a Honda Ridgeline at a BMW dealership. And not a lot of people go into BMW dealerships in the Charlotte metro area to buy all-wheel drive trucks. And so this truck had been on the lot for some time, and they were willing to offload the inventory at a very good deal. And additionally, at that time, I was looking for a Ridgeline in Vermont, where I live currently, and at that time, but it was hard and to come by a Ridgeline in the first model year because they were so popular. So this, as people may or may not know, is a 2017 Honda Ridgeline Black Edition. The top trim, and with that you get certain features that you didn't get in the lower trim levels. Nothing in particular that would affect what we're dealing with today. So it's the standard braking system that applies on all Honda Ridgelines of 2017, and I believe up to current year model, because there's only cosmetic changes. So we're going to take the wheel off on the wheel that I believe is the issue, and we're going to do an investigation. Now, the reason why I'm starting here, you may ask, is because this wheel, when I went to the gas station the other day, I put my hand up against the rotor, didn't touch it because I was afraid that it may be a seized caliper. And for those who are unfamiliar with what it means to have a seized caliper, is literally that the caliper piston hasn't retracted and is applying pressure onto the brake pads, which then in turn just causes constant friction against the rotor. And this constant friction obviously turns into heat, and so it can get to a point where it's actually scalding. So you never want to touch it, but you can put your hand up against it and just to feel what kind of radiation is coming off of that rotor. And that's what I did while I was at the gas station the other day refueling. What I learned there was that one side was warm and the other side was cool, which would be very indicative of maybe a seized caliper or maybe some pads that have not retracted once the brake has been let go. And so what that means is that the pads may be stuck in the actual caliper sliding hardware, and maybe we need to simply just make an adjustment or clean part of those components to reinitiate that movement. So it'll be interesting to see what we actually discover, if there's something obvious or not. I do have plans next year to replace all four wheels with new rotors and pads, and usually at that time I do a caliper service. Now unfortunately I wasn't really foreseeing that, and this month I was hoping to get through one more winter beforehand. That way, as I come out, I'm not really putting any extra strain on those brake hardware components, because it would literally be new hardware going into winter months and getting that salt and abuse. I kind of like to do it at the beginning of the summer so I get a full, break-in period. So we'll see where it takes, but let's go ahead and get started on this and see what we discover. So we already got the vehicle jacked up, we're ready to go, and basically we're going to use the air tools here to get this wheel off. I find it's a lot easier now that the car's already jacked up. So that'll be the next step. The first step actually is to remove the wheel, and let's go ahead and investigate that situation we got going on. So we got the wheel off now, and now we're going to basically take the caliper mounting brackets off here that attach to the slide pin. So this is going to be a 12 millimeter. Pretty simple. Basically, you're just loosening up one side of the caliper that attaches to the slide pin here. As you can see, we have pretty severe corrosion, which is pretty typical, I would say, for these type of vehicles that are doing work in the rust belt area, as mentioned. We're just going to slide this down, and actually, one thing you do have to do is you have to loosen both sides up. There we go. And actually, in this case, it's going to be easier just to take the actual caliper off. Let's just investigate the whole thing instead of just a part of it. Normally, I would slide it down so that we can just gain access, but I think it's better if we just take that and push it up to the side. So what we have here is two pads, and I believe what the issue is here is that we have a bit of corrosion that is built up between the slide pins, and so this pad is not fully releasing. And how we're going to remedy that is we're going to take both pads off. We're going to see if we can clean up these brackets right here. These are aluminum brackets that basically act as a reduced friction surface area so that the pads can slide easily on there. Now, one of the issues though with this kind of configuration is that when you get buildup from either dirt roads or salt or any kind of corrosion, then you basically impeded the ability of that pad to slide on that reduced friction surface area. So although well intended and well designed, the initial flaw is that you're never looking at it from a perspective of corrosion, right? You're always looking at it as, well, here's what the vehicle would do under normal circumstances. These are atypical circumstances in the sense you've got this issue. Now, the easy solution here would be to go ahead and just replace both the rotor and the pads because they're pretty close to due anyways, especially on this side since we've got a little bit of sticking. The pads have just worn down quite a bit. But I think if we can save these and get through one more winter, like I said, then what we'll do is in the summertime or in the springtime, go ahead and replace all four wheels with new rotors and new pads. While we're in here, typically I like to inspect the slide pins. So these slide pins are moving freely because this one's lower and is closer to the road surface. You tend to get this one freezing up more often than not. And so you definitely want to make sure that you have plenty of lubrication on both of these, but you'll likely experience seizing on this one, so make sure that you pay extra attention to this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically take a flathead screwdriver, remove these components that are holding the pads together, and then we will see if we can clean up the bracketry for this. Okay, so our goal here now is to remove these little keepers. So we got these keepers that hold the pads together, which are nice generally. In this case, they need to be removed. And so you can see that I got a flathead screwdriver and I'm prying against the pad, and I'm not able to get it to release from its housing. And so you immediately know that if you're applying that much pressure, that this pad cannot freely move. Right? So that's a problem. And more importantly, I can't put that much pressure, enough pressure on it to actually release. I'm really forcing this pad and it's not coming out. And so you can see how that pad came out fairly easy. Not perfectly, but it was definitely a lot easier to get out than the front pad. And so that shouldn't be the case, right? It should be pretty smooth movement. Look at that. It took that much effort to get that pad out. Now there's no way under normal driving conditions that that pad would have released. And so now we need to resolve the issue that's at hand. And this could be as simple as just road debris, but more likely it's a combination of road debris and maybe salt corrosion buildup here. So what I'm debating right now is actually just taking these clips off because they're fairly easy to remove in most cases. However, if you bend them, that can be a problem. So be very, very careful not to bend these. But what you can do is you can remove these from the caliper themselves. Just like that, fairly simply, with just prying. And what we could do is take this to the wire wheel, or what I'm going to do is just see if I can clean this up using a wire brush. Just a cheap 50-cent maybe Harbor Freight wire brush. So keeping it very, very simple here. I would say that this may be just dirt from dirt road use going on here, because this doesn't look like rust to me. This looks more like buildup and cake up of just maybe dirt. And so over the months, it's just kind of really gummed up that pad to the point where it's not moving. So this may be good preventative maintenance in general for anybody who lives on a dirt road who may be experiencing this. Is why not just as you do your annual inspection or whatever inspection interval that you do, to come in here and just take a look and see how your pads are functioning. Are they moving smoothly? And if they aren't, maybe this is what you do. Yeah, so now if we were to pretend that the pad was going back into its home here, so to speak, it's moving smoother for sure. Like, I would agree that it's not perfect. Can we get it better? Perhaps. We will work on that. But for now, I think this is where we're going to go. We're going to start just cleaning these up, and then I'll pick back up after I get the finished product here. Okay, so we're at the point where we've got our pads cleaned up. I went ahead and took the wire wheel to the ends of these in an effort to kind of clean up some of the debris that was there. And basically, reinstallation is going to be the same as installing any other brake change job, as a brake change job. And you're just going to find the slot in which the brake pad is going, and Now, one thing I did notice as I was cleaning this one up and then trying to fit it back, test fit it back in, is that we still got some sort of kind of binding going on. It doesn't want to glide naturally in, and so you gotta have to whack it a little bit to go in. And as you can see, it's still not ideal. So we got something bigger going on here, and I'm not quite sure what it is. But I'm really debating whether or not I want to just basically take a grinding wheel to the ends of these pads to give them just a little bit more tolerance here, because the tolerances seem pretty tight. And one of the issues is that this is a metal, basically a ferric metal component on the back of these pads. And as rust occurs on these pads, or the backing plate of these pads, the metal is actually swelling a little bit, and what we call rustjacking, which is where the rust in the metal will expand due to the corrosion component that's going on there, and it no longer meets the tolerances. It's actually expanded beyond that. That's kind of why you also apply heat sometimes when you have a rusted bolt, is because you want to expand it, because that rust has actually filled that gap to the point where it's basically locked together and taken up all the tolerance that was there. So I'm going to try to play around with this just a little bit more, see if I can get it to go in smoothly and run smoothly before I do that, because that's obviously kind of a bodge, if you will, to get those pads in there. And that's just not the original design, nor should it be necessarily the way we approach this, but that's what I've had to do in the past, and if I have to do that, we'll go ahead and do that. Alright, so I did end up taking a grinding wheel to the ends of these tabs just a bit to give us that extra tolerance that we need. Just be super careful when you do that. One, you get too much material off, and then the pad is just going to wiggle around, and then you're going to get this squealing noise every time you brake, which is going to be super annoying. So definitely try to just do a bare minimum here to get what you need to restore the functionality of it. But then additionally, some of these have coatings on them, and if you grind them away, then you're definitely taking that coating away. So then this end will be more prone to rusting and that occurring again. Now obviously, since this is only going to be one more winter, that's not that big of a deal. I'm actually fine with doing that. So we'll see now, how does that fit? And the answer is pretty well. So now we've got free moving pads on both sides, and now we just have to put the retaining clip back on. Retaining clip. What I like to do is just take a look at the caliper too, see if you can clean off any of the really big debris here, especially on the contact points for the pads. And most of this is dirt. You gotta be super careful about some of these internal pistons. They can be made of plastic, so you definitely don't want to take metal brushes to them. In this case, it looks like this one's metal, so we should be fine. You can hear all that, and you can see all that debris coming out of this caliper. So I think we're going to be doing a pretty big job come springtime cleaning these up, but we're also kind of preparing ourselves for winter here again, because this is just going to get worse if we were to leave it. Alright, so I think we're pretty good. I I mean, we don't want to invest too much time and effort into this because basically it's just going to happen again. So we've got our pad. Dad's trying to eject out here. Oop. So let me go ahead and reseat everything. That's kind of what I was mentioning, is that now we might have a little just too much material taken off on that pad to not really keep it within the area that we want to keep it in. And so now we're going to have to just get a little crafty with how we approach this. Also inspect your boots for any rips or tears. You definitely want to replace those as soon as you recognize those, because that will definitely increase your chances of having a seized slide pin. These look good, thankfully. So we are going to go ahead and reattach the caliper here. They don't need to be super tight, they just need to be tight enough that they go ahead and don't come off, right? So there's a torque spec obviously to that. I don't torque them to the spec, and you can blast me in the comments all you want, but I've never had one come off. Basically just tight. And that's how we go ahead and fix, seized pads on any car, but more commonly I noticed this with Hondas just because of the way that they're designed. They often have the propensity to get seized. So I'm going to just take an opportunity to clean up the rotor surface area. This will help with the wheel, making sure that we don't have any unevenness in the mounting of the wheel, which could cause a vibration or a shimmy. And then we'll call this done for now. So thanks for watching, and go ahead and leave me a comment if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, etc.